There was a civilization that built monuments to eternity, that mastered the art of preserving life after death. And quietly, behind temple veils and under starlit feasts, they were also mastering something else entirely, the ancient science of altered states. Long before psychedelics had names, before wellness rituals came with influencers, the Egyptians were spiking their wine with blue lotus, burning incense to slip into trances, and throwing festivals so wild, they believed the gods themselves once got blackout drunk and saved humanity by doing it. But this isn't just a story about drugs in antiquity. It's about how humans have always reached for transcendence, not through escape, but through ritual, beauty, and forbidden knowledge. Centuries later, in Renaissance Florence, women painted their faces with lead, laced their hair with cat dung, and squeezed their ribs into corsets so tight they could barely breathe, all to become living sculptures of divine elegance. And tucked beneath silk robes and sacred texts, a quiet revolution was unfolding, in the form of banned books, secret poems, and hand-illustrated manuscripts of love so explicit, the church burned them on sight. So tonight, we're diving into three hidden worlds, altered states of ancient Egypt, the pain of Renaissance beauty, and secrets in print, the forbidden books of the Renaissance. We'll explore how intoxication became worship, how fashion became torture, and how desire, disguised as heresy, quietly reshaped an entire era. Because history isn't just written by the victors, sometimes it's whispered in the margins, painted on skin, or soaked into a cup of spiced wine offered to a god. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. This is a space for the curious, the quiet rebels, and anyone who's ever looked at history and thought, there's more to this story. And let me know in the comments where you retuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who is joining us from around the world. Maybe you re-sipping tea in Kyoto, lying awake in Buenos Aires, or burning midnight oil in Berlin. Wherever you are, welcome, let's begin. Music swells slightly, then softens, the screen fades into the first visual, a golden blue lotus blooming on the surface of the Nile. Let's start with the ancient Egyptians' most famous botanical party trick. Section 1. Altered states of ancient Egypt, long before modern science gave names to neurotransmitters. Before psychology mapped the mind's hidden corridors, there was a civilization that didn't just believe in transcendence, they engineered it. Welcome to ancient Egypt, a land of pyramids, pharaohs, and sacred order. But also, quietly, one of history's most sophisticated experiments in recreational chemistry. Because behind the limestone temples and golden masks, the Egyptians were not just building monuments to gods, they were crafting pathways into them, through smoke, wine, incense, and roots that screamed when pulled from the earth. Let us begin with a flower. The blue lotus, delicate, celestial, painted on tomb walls like a divine signature. You've seen it, held in the hands of kings, offered at banquets, its petals gently waved like a silent toast to the cosmos. But this was no mere ornament, this was sacrament. Soak its dried petals in wine, let them steep 4 days, and drink. The effect, a soft, dreamy euphoria, not enough to lose yourself, but enough to forget you were ever lost, a gentle lift, like drifting down the Nile at dusk, where time slows and hieroglyphs seem to whisper secrets. To the Egyptians, this wasn't getting high, it was communing with the gods. The blue lotus was tied to rebirth, to the sun god Ra, to the moment each dawn, when light split the horizon. To inhale its scent was to breathe divinity itself. And if it also took the edge off after a long day of ruling an empire, well, even gods need a little relief. But sometimes, relief came not in sips, but in floods. Enter the Feast of Drunkenness, an annual festival dedicated not to moderation, but to total spiritual obliteration, honoring the goddess Hathor, the lion-eyed deity of love, music, and destruction. Legend says she once went on a rampage, slaughtering humanity in a bloodlust so fierce the other gods feared extinction. So they tricked her. They dyed beer red, made it look like blood, and she drank until she passed out, woke up cheerful, and spared the world. So every year, Egyptians gathered to reenact this salvation, not metaphorically, literally. They drank until they collapsed, until visions blurred with reality, until laughter turned to prophecy, and strangers became family. Priests encouraged it. Drink as much as your heart desires. Tambourines rattled, bodies swayed, and under the stars, people fell into trances. Some say, saw Hathor herself. Others just saw the inside of a clay jug. But it didn't matter. This was ritual. This was renewal. This was theology, with a hangover. And what were they drinking? Not the crisp lager of modern bars. No. This was beer. Thick, porridge-like, more chewable than drinkable. Imagine oatmeal with opinions. Fermented from half-baked loaves of emmer bread, mashed, soaked, and left to bubble in open vats. No carbonation, no foam, just a dense, soupy slurry, liquid bread, as some called it. And everyone drank it, peasants, priests, children, even toddlers. Because while the Nile could kill you with disease, this beer had been boiled, fermented, spiced. It was safer than water. And far more fun. Workers building the pyramids paid in beer, several liters a day. Half of ancient Egypt's labor force built wonders, while mildly buzzed. But beer wasn't just sustenance, it was a canvas. And like any good artist, the Egyptians enhanced it. Add mandrake root for a deeper trance, fermented date juice for a sweeter burn, even blue lotus for that extra touch of divine floatiness. Why stop at one altered state when you could layer them? And speaking of layers, let's talk about smoke. Not just any smoke. Enter kyphi, the incense of the gods. Not a quick puff of frankincense, but a complex, fermented perfume, a recipe so elaborate, it reads like an ancient IKEA manual. Myrrh, honey, wine, raisins, cinnamon, juniper, mint, all mixed, fermented, shaped into pellets, and burned slowly in temples. The goal, to fill sacred spaces with a fragrance so thick, so intoxicating, that the boundary between body and spirit dissolved. Temples had no ventilation on purpose. That sacred haze, that dizziness, that was the point. Kyphi wasn't just for worship. It was medicine, perfume, spiritual elevator. Pliny the Elder later claimed it cured snake bites. More likely, it just made the snake seem less threatening. And yes, it was buried with the dead, burned during mummification. Because if you're entering the afterlife, you might as well do it smelling like a divine bakery. Now, if Blue Lotus was the chill friend, and Kyphi the drama queen with a smoke machine, then Mandrake, or Mandra, as they called it, was the one guest you invited once, and regretted. With roots that looked disturbingly human, and a reputation that scared even priests, Mandrake was no casual herb. It contained scopolamine and atropine, chemicals that don't just alter your mind. They rewrite it, in small doses, sleep, pain relief. Maybe a romantic poem or two. In larger ones, night terrors, hallucinations, waking up 4 days later convinced you were a scarab beetle. And the myths show, later folklore said pulling a mandrake from the ground caused it to scream. A sound so lethal, it could kill you. So the solution, tie it to a dog. Cover your ears, let the poor beast yank it free. No solid proof the Egyptians did this, but the idea fits. Because mandrake wasn't for amateurs, it was for priests, magicians, those who didn't mind taking medical advice from a man covered in gold leaf, used carefully, transcendence, used recklessly, possession, and then there was cannabis. Yes, Ashemit, as the Egyptians called it, mentioned in medical papyri for inflammation, sore eyes, gynecological issues, which means, yes, THC-infused suppositories may have existed, and someone, somewhere, will try to sell those on Etsy. crushed into oils, blended with honey, applied topically, not for recreation, officially. But let's be honest, in 120-degree heat, with crocodiles and bureaucracy, who's to say the high priest wasn't just really into his job? And then there was opium, the poppy resin smuggled from Cyprus, tucked away like a divine secret. Pain relief, sleep aid, calming agent for coughs and cosmic anxiety. Administered in drinks, pills, or, again, suppositories. Because apparently, that was the delivery method of choice. Priests used it. Pharaohs likely did too. And in death, maybe it was part of the final send-off, a blissful ride into the underworld, where even the scarab crawling on your nose seemed friendly. But none of this was random. None of it was indulgence. It was ritual. Because in Egypt, altered states weren't escapes, they were doorways. Through repetitive drumming, rhythmic chants, sleep deprivation, and wine laced with floating botanicals, priests and dancers entered trance states, convulsions, prophecy, sudden changes in voice. If a temple dancer started shaking mid-song, she wasn't ill. She was possessed by Hathor, by a god, by divine truth. And the people, they didn't flee, they applauded. This was how messages came from the gods. Sometimes wisdom, sometimes demands for more cake. Once the trance ended, the vessel returned, dazed, sweaty, possibly drooling, but revered. This was religion at its most visceral. The divine breaking through the veil of reality, even if the veil was just thick kyphi smoke, and it wasn't just for the living. The Egyptians believed the dead weren't gone, just relocated, so they threw them parties. During festivals like the beautiful Feast of the Valley, families brought food, wine, music to tombs. They'd sit, eat, drink, and talk to the wall, hoping Great-Aunt Nefret appreciated the pickled fish. False doors carved into stone served as portals, offerings poured into the afterlife. Some even slept in tombs, hoping for dreams, guidance, maybe a tip on where Grandpa hid the gold. Because to the Egyptians, death wasn't a goodbye. It was a change of address. Unlike any good host, you packed snacks and drugs. Tombs were stocked with blue lotus, wine jugs, incense, herbs, even instructions on how to use them in the afterlife. Because eternal bliss required maintenance. Take Tutankhamun. When Carter opened his tomb, he didn't just find gold. He found wine, oils, herbs, what can only be described as an ancient Egyptian wellness kit. This wasn't luxury. It was necessity. The soul needed nourishment, stimulation, a decent buzz. And the priesthood, they weren't just spiritual guides. They were pharmacists, gatekeepers of the sacred stash, blue lotus, mandrake, opium, cannabis, kyphi. They knew which blends calmed, which induced visions, which made a man believe he was a god. And in a society obsessed with order, who truly held power, the pharaoh, or the man who controlled the incense burners. Because if the gods spoke through visions, and the visions came after sniffing something pungent in a sealed chamber, well, you do the math. And of course, access followed hierarchy. The elite, bathing in blue lotus oil, sipping spiked pomegranate wine from gold chalices. Pharaoh himself likely dosed his insomnia with psychoactive nightcaps, not indulgence. National security. When your dreams are state messages from the gods, you need help sleeping. The commoners, barley beer, weak incense, and whatever spiritual euphoria they could squeeze, between 18-hour shifts building obelisks. But make no mistake, this wasn't chaos. It was controlled chemical theater. Science and spirituality, hand in hand, walking to the beat of a cymbal and the smell of something smoldering. The Egyptians understood something we've forgotten, that altered states aren't escapes from life, but deeper entries into it. That pain relief and prophecy can come from the same flower. That healing and hallucination are cousins. They weren't primitive drug users. They were ritual chemists, crafting moments of transcendence with precision, turning intoxication into worship and pleasure into piety. So the next time you sip a glass of wine, burn a stick of incense, or scroll through wellness trends promising enlightenment, remember, the ancient Egyptians were already there, with better eyeliner and stronger recipes. Because in their world, to feel more, see more, know more, wasn't rebellion, it was religion. And if that journey to inner peace happened to involve wine, wild flowers, and a trance where you barked like Anubis, so be it. After all, some truths are easier to find when you're not entirely sober. Music fades, a single flute echoes over still water. Next time, we'll trade the Nile for the Arno and explore a beauty so painful it could only be Renaissance. Section 2. The Pain of Renaissance Beauty. Florence, late 1400s. The city breathes art, the air hums with genius. Michelangelo shapes marble, Leonardo sketches flight, and somewhere behind velvet curtains, a noble woman sits perfectly still, as another layer of poison is painted onto her face. Because while men were sculpting beauty, women were becoming it at any cost. Welcome to Renaissance beauty, a world where elegance was not just admired, it was endured. This wasn't about looking good. It was about looking otherworldly, like you'd stepped out of a Botticelli painting, hairless, poreless, glowing, a porcelain statue dressed in brocade. And if that meant suffering, so be it. Pain was the price of perfection. Let's begin with the face. In Florence, Venice, Rome, across the courts of Italy, the most coveted look wasn't sun-kissed or vibrant. No, the ideal was pale, ghostly, almost cadaverous. Why? Because tan skin meant labor, meant field work, meant peasant, but pale skin, that was luxury. A declaration that you never had to work under the sun. You didn't sweat, you didn't toil. You simply existed, ethereal and untouched, and so they reached for Sarasa, a silky white face paint made from one of the most toxic substances known to man, lead, yes, actual lead. Ground into powder, mixed with vinegar, and brushed across cheeks, forehead, décolletage, a shimmering death mask worn as fashion. They called it Cerus, but really, it was slow-motion suicide. Women layered it on thick, like Venetian stucco, some even sleeping in it, refusing to wash their faces 4 days, letting the poison soak deeper into their pores. When sewers appeared, and they always did, they simply painted over them. A Renaissance band-aid made of heavy metal, and when lead wasn't enough, there was mercury, used to fade blemishes, to erase sunspots, to purify the skin, or arsenic, mixed into tonics, rubbed into the scalp, because nothing said refinement like chronic poisoning. Imagine it, a woman at court, radiant, flawless, smelling of rose water, while her organs quietly failed, anemic, delirious, possibly dead by 30, and yet, she was beautiful. And beauty was power, but the face wasn't enough. Not if your eyebrows looked too human. In Renaissance Florence, having brows was practically indecent. Eyebrows, too animalistic, too expressive, too real, so women plucked them away, completely. Hairlines were yanked back, forehead stretched high, to achieve that smooth, egg-like dome considered the height of intellect and nobility. A high forehead wasn't just fashionable, it was philosophical. The larger the forehead, the more room for divine thought. And how did they do it? With tweezers, with seashells, with rough cloth rubbed raw against the skin. For stubborn hairs, they used cat dung. Yes, smeared on the brow line to thin regrowth. Some even held candles to their skin, scorching stray hairs off in the name of grace. Then, once the canvas was bare, they repainted it, burnt cork, powdered charcoal. Drawn in delicate arches, so faint, so thin, they'd smear in the Florentine heat. Imagine sitting through Mass, your carefully drawn brows slowly melting down your cheeks, divine, body hair. Unthinkable, seen as vulgar, unclean. So they removed it, with a paste of vinegar, quicklime, and arsenic. It burned, it blistered, but the skin was smooth, until it wasn't, and the hair on their heads artificial. Wigs made of wool, horsehair, or stolen human strands, bleached with lye, soaked in dye, then pinned into elaborate towers of braids and padding. If it didn't match your natural color, no matter, just wear a cap, problem solved. All this done without mirrors. Most women stole themselves by feel, guided only by servants' hands and whispered advice. One wrong tug, and your elegant widow's peak became a tragic monstrosity. This wasn't grooming, it was war. And now, the body. Once the face was powdered, the brows erased, the hair sculpted, it was time to reshape the silhouette itself. Enter the corset, not quite the wasp-waisted torture device of later centuries, but close. Known as stays or bodies, these early corsets were rigid, unforgiving, designed to flatten the torso into a smooth, upright column, like a living obelisk. Whalebone for the rich, reeds or pasteboard for the rest. All of it stitched into linen, laced tightly across the back. Getting dressed required help, patience, and the ability to breathe shallowly 4 hours. A fully dressed noblewoman wasn't just adorned, she was armored. An elegant artichoke, layered, structured, strangely fragile. And the corset wasn't just fashion, it was morality. A straight spine meant virtue. A slouch, moral decay, possibly demonic influence. So you stood tall, walked stiffly, breathed in tiny sips of air. And if you fainted gracefully in public, even better, proof of refinement, proof you weren't built for this world. Underneath, linen smocks absorbed sweat, because let's be honest, Florence in summer was a furnace. No airflow, no comfort, just elegance. But here's the real test, eating. Because how do you feast at a banquet when your ribs are being slowly crushed? Noble women attended lavish dinners, tables groaning under roasted peacock, marzipan sculptures, gilded fruit. But they could barely eat, a dainty bite, a polite sip. No unhinging the jaw, no enjoying that goose leg, to chew with passion, barbaric, to show hunger, vulgar. And to risk splitting your bodice mid-dinner, social annihilation. So they nibbled, smiled, pretended, while internally, their stomachs screamed. Sometimes, the pressure alone would trigger a faint, which, ironically, only added to the aesthetic, pale, breathless, collapsing into a courtier's arms, romantic, but behind closed doors. Another story, in private chambers, the corset came off, with gasps, groans, and the audible creak of ribs returning to shape. And then, freedom and snacks. Hidden stashes of cheese, sweet meats, leftover wine, midnight feasts devoured in silence. Because even Renaissance queens had cravings, they just couldn't admit it. And there were rules even for eating. Cucumbers, dangerous, made the skin watery. Wine, encouraged, flushed the cheeks with divine color. Some drank vinegar tonics to stay slim. Never mind the damage to their stomach lining. Digestion was a battlefield. In a corset, the stomach had nowhere to go. Indigestion, bloating, and heaven forbid an unladylike burp. The horror. While men argued philosophy and drained goblets, women mastered the art of elegant starvation, eating just enough to seem sociable, never enough to ruin the line of their gown. But appearance wasn't just visual, it was olfactory. In Renaissance Florence, your scent was part of your armor. The streets reeked, waste, animals, unwashed bodies, but a noble woman, she wafted. Through salons, basilicas, courtyards, trailing clouds of rose water, musk, ambergris, a waxy substance harvested from the intestines of sperm whales. Outrageously expensive, worldly fashionable. The original whale-based perfume, she soaked gloves in fragrance, stitched scented herbs into dress linings, sprayed handkerchiefs, she'd flutter dramatically when someone less hygienic drew near. Perfume wasn't luxury, it was survival, a social weapon. And scent layering was essential. First, a bath of rose water or camphor. Then crushed violet petals dusted on the skin, oils rubbed into wrists. A final mist of whatever exotic blend her apothecary swore would make men weep. Some wore pomanders, delicate, perforated orbs filled with aromatic herbs, worn around the neck or dangling from belts. Approach with caution. I smell of cinnamon and judgment. But these potions weren't always kind. Some contained turpentine. Others caused headaches, nausea, even fainting. One wrong blend, and you went from seductive to insufferable. Still, the right fragrance opened doors. A woman who smelled divine had power. Power to entrance, to distract, to survive a crowd of unwashed poets. And now, the finale, fashion. If beauty was a battlefield, Florence was its glittering war zone. Every fabric screamed status. Velvet, thick, imported, absurdly expensive, worn in summer as a power move. You were hot, yes, but you were important. Brocade, woven with gold thread, lions, vines, entire religious scenes, gowns so elaborate they could double as altarpieces. Colors were coded, deep blues from lapis lazuli, crimsons from cochineal insects, pigments so costly they were locked away like treasure. Sumptuary laws tried to restrict them. Only nobles could wear certain hues. But laws were boring. Dresses were not. Sleeves were detachable, not for practicality, but competition. Women owned dozens, embroidered, puffed, pearl-encrusted, flaunted like modern designer handbags. Some sleeves needed their own storage, their own servants. Underneath, everything was ornate. Smocks trimmed with lace, petticoats peeking out in silken flashes, girdles studded with gems, hiding perfume, prayer books, maybe revenge notes. A single gown could cost more than a craftsman's yearly wage. But noblewomen needed them. Every event was a stage. Every outfit, a statement, wearing the same dress twice. Social suicide and footwear are the chop irons, the most theatrical shoes ever invented. High platforms, wooden stilts, originally from Venice, designed to keep dresses above muddy, plague-ridden streets. But function gave way to fashion. Chop irons grew taller, some over 20 inches high, walking unaided. Impossible, required a servant on each arm. A fall could take out half the wedding party. In Florence, they were slightly smaller, but still absurd. Delicate slippers of velvet, embroidered silk, lined with fur, worn indoors, outdoors. Strapped onto wooden patterns, practical, unless you tripped and shattered your kneecaps. Shoes were narrow, pointed, built for neither comfort nor walking. But who needed to walk? Real ladies didn't walk. They floated, they glided, they suffered gracefully, and then came dancing. After hours of being powdered, plucked, laced, perfumed, and platformed, what next? Of course, try to glide across a polished marble floor in 20 pounds of fabric and half a long's worth of air. Courtly dances were serious business. No wild reels, no tavern energy. These were slow, precise, excruciatingly choreographed performances. Every step rehearsed, every movement symbolic. The pavon, the galliard, gliding in patterns, keeping gaze modest, never ever breathing through the mouth, undignified. But corsets didn't allow deep breaths anyway. Each leap was a gamble, a misstep, scandalous. A clumsy turn, ruinous. Parents hired dance tutors, like influencers highlighting designers. You learned to bow, to fan yourself just enough to be mysterious, but not so much you look sweaty. Dancing was also flirtation, with gloves touching, eyes meeting, perfumes mingling. A chance to interact with suitors, but say too much, laugh aloud. You risk destroying your entire image of pious elegance. And all the while, judgment loomed. Other women critiqued your posture. Servants whispered, tutors fretted, and you had to maintain the illusion that none of it mattered. So you danced, you smiled, you endured, and when the music stopped, you slipped away to repowder your sweat-streaked sarasa. Before round two, finally, Night. The guests depart. Candles melt. The noblewoman returns to her chambers, but sleep, not yet. Now comes the night ritual. Less self-care, more controlled deterioration. Step 1. Unmasking. Linen cloths, rose water, raw egg whites. The lead paint must be gently lifted, scrubbed to hard, and skin comes with it. Almond oil, vinegar. Hope the complexion underneath isn't ruined. Spoiler, it usually is. Then the hair, pins, false braids, adhesives, dissolved with herbal tonics. Pray no bald patches from cat dung and lime. Next, the corset, unlacing, a spiritual release, gasping, groaning, ribs cracking back into place. Freedom, brief, sweet freedom. Feet peeled from slippers, toes mashed, bruised, broken. Soaked in lavender water, if lucky. If not, just stared at in despair, then rubbed with sweet oils. Or, if paranoid, alchemical tonics promising eternal youth. Smelling of old copper, probably containing powdered beetles. Beauty's pain, also possibly pestilence. And finally, the candle. Blown out not with a huff, improper, but a delicate puff, like apologizing to the flame. She lies back, hairline 2 inches farther back than last year. Skin paler, thinner, lungs recovering. But tomorrow, she do it all again. Because in Renaissance Florence, beauty wasn't a look, it was a full-time performance. A high-stakes masquerade with no intermission, and the audience, everyone. So the next time you scroll through filters, contemplate a new serum, or sigh at the effort of getting ready, remember her. The woman who poisoned her skin, burned her brows, crushed her ribs, and walked on stilts, all to be called beautiful. And ask yourself, how much has really changed? Music fades, a single candle flickers out. Next time, we'll leave the salon for the study and uncover the forbidden books that shape desire, disguised as sin. Section 3, Secrets in Print, Forbidden Books of the Renaissance Rome, 1559. A list is drawn up in silence, not of traitors, not of heretics, but of books. One by one, they are named, banned, condemned to fire, obscurity, or exile. This is the Index Librorum Prohibitorum, the Catholic Church's official blacklist of forbidden literature. And on it, philosophy, astronomy, anatomy, and above all, love. Because in the heart of the Renaissance, an age of art, reason, and rebirth, there was a quiet war being waged, not with swords, not with armies, but with ink. And tonight, we go underground, to secret libraries, hidden compartments, and whispered verses. To women copying poems behind convent walls. To nobles smuggling books beneath their cloaks. To printers who risked everything to publish the truth, or just something very, very naughty. Welcome to the world of forbidden books, where desire wore the mask of piety, and reading could get you arrested. Let us begin not with scandal, but with guilt. In Renaissance Europe, sex wasn't discussed, it was regulated, and the rule book, written by celibate monks, theologians, and priests who had never so much as held hands with a woman. Enter the marriage manual, a genre so bizarre, it sounds like satire. Books like De Matrimonio, filled with diagrams, calendars, and lists of forbidden days for intimacy. Sundays, sinful. Feast days, absolutely not. Lent, God forbid. There were roughly 180 days a year when even married couples were told to abstain, as if procreation were a chore best done quickly and without enthusiasm. Passion was suspicious, joy was dangerous. Women were to be silent, submissive, and preferably asleep during the act. Men were warned not to let desire burn too brightly, lest they slip into the fires of damnation. And yet, these books were wildly popular, especially among the clergy. Why? Because they were the only texts that acknowledged sex at all. So people read them, not for doctrine, but for details. A marriage manual on your shelf was acceptable. What you underlined in it, that was your business. Ironically, the more the church tried to control desire, the more it fueled curiosity. And so, while one hand wrote rules, the other reached for something else, something illustrated. Enter the anatomical treatise, a scientific marvel disguised as softcore erotica. Texts like De Humani Corporis Fabrica by Andreas Vesalius were groundbreaking. They revealed the human body in exquisite, clinical detail, muscles, organs, nerves, all laid bare. But there was one small problem: the women were naked. Not clothed in modesty, not draped in shadow. No, full frontal, idealized, posed like goddesses in a Botticelli painting. Except flayed open down the chest. Was this medicine? Yes. Was it also titillation? Undoubtedly. These images slipped through the moral net under the guise of education. A young noble court with a dog-eared page showing a reclining nude, just studying the lymphatic system, father, and if his thumb was worn over the hip bone. Well, that was between him and God. Some printers leaned into it. Editions were produced with extra attention to curves, lighting, and composition. Anatomical accuracy blended seamlessly with artistic fantasy. If you wanted to look at naked bodies, all you had to do was pretend to care about the spleen. These weren't back-alley pamphlets. They were printed by respected presses, collected in universities, cited by physicians. But between the dry Latin and muscle diagrams, there was just enough temptation to keep readers flipping pages, with slightly more enthusiasm than necessary. But not all forbidden books hid behind science. Some didn't bother hiding at all. By the mid-Renaissance, a new kind of text began circulating in private salons: love manuals, half etiquette guide, half seduction playbook, written for noblemen and women who wanted to flirt, without falling directly into hell. Unlike the rigid marriage guides, these reveled in ambiguity. They taught the art of the glance, the science of sighing, the importance of hand placement during a slow court dance. They offered sample dialogues, thinly veiled pick-up lines, like how to compliment a lady's lute playing without offending her chaperone. Popular among the elite were epistolary romances, fictional love letters between imaginary nobles, Count Lorenzo, Lady Fiorella, poetic, dramatic, just vague enough to be interpreted as scandalous. You could practically hear the gloves slowly coming off. And the advice, practical yet charged. Men were told to keep nails clean and teeth white, so a kiss wouldn't offend. Women were reminded to avoid onions before a romantic conversation, all of it wrapped in elegant rhyming couplets, dripping with double meaning. For young nobles trapped between arranged marriages and religious guilt, these books were escape hatches. Legal to own, dangerous to understand, but the real rebels weren't writing in Latin, they were reading it. And one name stood above all others: Arvid. His Ars Amatoria, the art of love, was a step-by-step guide to seduction. How to spot a lover at the theatre, how to feign jealousy just enough to keep things spicy, how to win affection through wit, wine, and well-timed compliments, witty, elegant, utterly immoral by church standards. Naturally, it was banned, and naturally, it was everywhere. Copies were hidden behind Bibles, bound in blank covers, passed hand to hand. Marginalia in surviving editions reveal notes like, "Tried this at Carnival," "Worked on Cecilia," "Latin had never been so fun." Then there was Apelles' The Golden Ass, a mythological novel that slipped past censors thanks to its spiritual allegory, and its vivid scenes of lust, transformation, and a talking donkey. It was technically philosophy. It was also erotica with a toga on. Even bolder were translations of Arabic and Greek love poetry, texts like The Perfumed Garden, smuggled into elite circles, sensual, explicit, framed as enlightenment. Access required connections, bribes, and discretion. Booksellers knew the game. Officially, theology and grammar. Unofficially, a wink and the coin opened a cabinet labeled medical curiosities. Nobles commissioned illuminated manuscripts, gold leaf cherubs, watching very adult scenes unfold. These books weren't just read, they were experienced, passed around salons, quoted at masquerades, banned by bishops, and devoured in candlelit solitude, but the church was watching. By the mid-1500s, Pope Paul IV issued the Index Librorum Prohibitorum, a hit list of dangerous ideas. Protestant theology, banned; astrology, banned; Ovid, banned; Erasmus, double banned. Anything that hinted at individual thought, pleasure, or freedom, erased. Possessing a forbidden book wasn't a joke. Printers faced arrest, scholars were summoned, libraries were searched, and if you were caught, public penance, confiscation, imprisonment. But here's the thing about banning books: it makes them more desirable. Underground markets thrived. Printers in Venice, Lyon, and Basel produced 2 editions, one clean, one uncut. The difference: a missing passage, a toned-down illustration, or a completely fake title page. One infamous copy of the Golden Ass rebound as Sermons of St. Augustine. Talk about divine irony. Nobles built secret compartments, false bindings, mirrored cabinets. A well-curated bookshelf said, "Yes, I fear God. But I also read Ovid," and women. They were masters of subversion. Behind convent walls, where young women were sent not by choice, but by family convenience, libraries became sanctuaries of suppressed desire. On the surface, saints' lives, theological commentaries, devotional poetry. But dig deeper, marginalia scrawled in corners, passages underlined with suspicious enthusiasm, handwritten copies of Ovid's Amoras tucked between prayer books. One nun in Ferrara was reprimanded for translating Ovid into the vernacular, for educational purposes, she claimed. Others wrote their own sonnets, melancholic, coded, steeped in longing. Scholars suspect many anonymous love poems were penned by cloistered women, using writing as a romantic escape hatch. An abbess in Florence once petitioned to keep her convent's illustrated anatomy manual, on the grounds that it helped the sisters understand temptation, a very creative justification. Literacy meant autonomy, autonomy meant rebellion, and in the silence after Vespers, a candle would flicker, and a young nun would open a worn book, not of scripture, but of something warmer, a stolen fragment of a world she'd never touch, but could still imagine. Because sometimes the most forbidden books weren't about lust, they were about freedom. And then there were the books that weren't printed at all, hidden in aprons, buried under floorboards, whispered from memory in back alleys, grimoires, charm books, herb manuals, passed between midwives, herbalists, and women who were definitely not calling themselves witches, but everyone else was. Love was power, and power, especially in a woman's hands, was dangerous. So love spells flourished in secret, a strand of hair, a cup of wine, a muttered phrase beneath the full moon, one spell from southern Italy. Sow dried basil into your lover's doublet. Whisper their name 3 times. Sprinkle rose water on their pillow. If they dreamed of you, the magic had taken hold. If not, stronger measures. Aphrodisiacs were another staple: cinnamon, anise, ground oysters, mandrake root, some effective, some toxic. One apothecary cheerfully recommended honey, wine, and powdered stag antler, failed to mention the nosebleeds. These texts were kept by women, passed mother to daughter, but owning one, a gamble. The Inquisition didn't look kindly on female knowledge. A love spell could become a witch trial by dawn. So pages were burned, disguised as herb journals. You could be a healer on Tuesday, and a heretic by Thursday. But then came the printing press. Gutenberg may have started with Bibles, but it wasn't long before printers discovered a far more lucrative market: desire. Venice became the capital of this quiet revolution. Wealth, leniency, a taste for vice. Hidden behind religious tracts, slim, privately circulated books appeared. No pretense, no disguise, just explicit, illustrated, and ready to shock. One of the most infamous was I Modi, the Positions, created by Giulio Romano illustrations and Pietro Aretino poetry. It depicted 16 explicit engravings of sexual intimacy, paired with verses sharp enough to cut marble. Needless to say, the church was not amused. I Modi was immediately banned. Plates seized, copies destroyed, Romano arrested. But the idea had been unleashed. You could use the printing press for erotica. And it wasn't going back. Underground presses sprang up across Europe. Slim volumes of love poetry, scandalous tales, outright smut, expensive, exclusive, meant for wealthy patrons. Some were even commissioned, custom Renaissance fanfiction, fake title pages, false locations, bindings that looked like dictionaries, portable lust. The printing press didn't just democratize knowledge, it made pleasure portable. And with every new title, readers got closer to something revolutionary, pleasure without permission. By the end of the Renaissance, the line between education, entertainment, and seduction had blurred beyond recognition. To the church, these books were moral decay, to scholars, intellectual experiments. But to those who actually read them, noblewomen, students, nuns, merchants, they were something else entirely. Power, quiet, subversive, born in the margins of a page. In an age where women's bodies were controlled, their voices silenced, their desires shamed, these books offered an alternative script. Where love wasn't always arranged, where pleasure could be named, where curiosity didn't have to be confessed in Latin. And let's not forget the men. Philosophers who debated virtue by day might go home and read the Golden Ass with a glass of wine. Priests who condemned lust from the pulpit sometimes kept Arvid beneath their cassock. Human nature has always been good at compartmentalizing. The Forbidden Bookshelf wasn't just a Renaissance quirk, it was a reflection of a world wrestling with change. The printing press had opened Pandora's box. Literacy was spreading. Ideas were getting harder to control. And once people realized that books could make them feel deeply, privately, sinfully, there was no going back. Most of these books didn't survive, burned, hidden, miscatalogued, but some did. They sit today in museum vaults, fragile and foxed with age, still humming with the echoes of secrets whispered across centuries. Because the Renaissance wasn't just a rebirth of art and science, it was a rebirth of desire. And in between the sermons and sculptures, the forbidden books tell us everything the marble couldn't. Music swells softly, then fades into silence. Next time, we'll leave the study, step into the future, and ask, what happens when the past refuses to stay buried? We began with lotus wine under Egyptian stars, where intoxication was worship and beer was breakfast. We walked through Renaissance salons on broken arches, where beauty meant poison, pain, and perfume worn like armor. And we ended in candlelit studies, turning pages that were never meant to be seen, where desire wore the mask of piety, and knowledge defied dogma. These stories are not just about drugs, fashion, or books. They're about what it means to be human, our endless pursuit of transcendence, our obsession with image, and our quiet rebellion against control. In every era, people have reached beyond the ordinary to feel more, look divine, know the forbiddens. And they've paid a price: lead-laced skin, crushed ribs, prison, exile, not because they were foolish, but because they were alive. So the next time you sip a glass of wine, adjust your eyeliner, or open a book without permission, remember, you're not just indulging. You're continuing an ancient ritual, one written in smoke, painted in poison, and printed in secret. Because history doesn't just happen in palaces and parliaments. It happens in the margins, in the haze, in the whisper between lines, and sometimes it begins with a single question: what if I could feel more? Welcome to the hidden side of civilization, where truth isn't carved in stone. It's written in ink, stained with coal, and passed from hand to hand, in the dark.